the thing that we think we want, might not always be the thing that we actually need or is good for us.
Join Edwin Frondozo on the Business Leadership Podcast every week for a unique program featuring insights and actionable items from the world's most successful business leaders. Hear firsthand the exclusive interviews and personal journeys on how today's transformational leaders made it to the top.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Biz Leader. Thank you for taking the time to join me today. And on today's episode of the Business Leadership Podcast, I share the conversation that I had with a very good friend of mine, Melanie Sodka. She is a human behavior enthusiast, helping overwhelmed business leaders, entrepreneurs, and creators who are overcommitted and distracted. As a TEDx Speaker Award-winning business professor, speaker, and podcaster, Melanie continues to reach worldwide audiences with her research in capacity management, hustle culture, and burnout. Her research and tools have helped tens of thousands in managing their personal capacity while staying out of burnout and doing more of what they love. We discuss how multitasking is eroding our capacity, why anchoring yourself to accountability is important, and the magic rule of 3. This episode is brought to you by Slingshot Communications, the business leader's preferred cloud phone service. But without further ado, here we go. Welcome to the Business Leadership Podcast, Melanie.
Hey, Edwin, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing awesome. I'm super excited, super pumped to have you back on the show. I know our first time, we actually did a live episode. I don't know, this is many years ago before Clubhouse, and you were nice enough to join me and collaborate with me at that time. So I'm super pumped to have you come back and really dig deep into what you're up to, your world, and also get an update. But I guess, Melanie, can we just start off by introducing yourself to our listeners today? Tell us who you are and what you like to do when you're not leading or growing businesses.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me back. I do remember our first time, and it was interesting. I was sitting in my office, and I was like, "Oh, what is that? Like, how are we going to do this live thing?" Right? It was still newer, and anyways, it was great. But yeah, I'm Melanie Sodka, like vodka with an S, and I do wear many different hats. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a business professor. And I'm also an entrepreneur, a business owner, and the business is called Capacity Creator Corporation. And I love helping students and businesses really take a look at their business models. I geek out on that stuff. The strategizers, the business model canvas is like the holy grail for really making sure that you have a good foundation. So I love to dive into that. And talking to people, like this is one of my favorite things to do is podcast too, because we're researching and we're engaging in conversation that we wouldn't normally have. And so I love to keep this fresh and keep talking to different people. So yeah, we're here. It's exciting.
Well, you are a podcaster, and
yes.
It's one of my favorite interviews. I mean, I love all my interviews, and I'm sure you're like this as well. But I find when I have other fellow podcasters on, it's just a different type of flow and energy. I think because we understand the medium,
yes,
or at least a practitioner of the medium, right? Where we are leveraging the power of our voice and our communications to really bring out things, because I mean you're a seasoned speaker, so you understand the energy and the flow when you're in front of people. But podcast is a whole new medium still, and people don't realize and understand the practice it takes to really do it. So I'm really excited, and shout out to your podcast. It's Hustle Hypocrisy, right?
Got it. Yeah, Hustle Hypocrisy. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We'll definitely put a link to it, and make sure if you're listening to subscribe, comment. Check out Melanie's podcast. It's amazing.
Thank you.
what I'm really geeking out about, Melanie, and I sort of mentioned this at the beginning before we press record, is really being productive and creating flow. And someone like yourself, who mentioned in your intro that you have so many things on the plate. You're an entrepreneur, you're a mother, you're a professor, and you're also producing and creating at a very high level. But, what do you say to someone who is, I guess, struggling as a self-proclaimed great multitasker?
Well, if you haven't seen the TED Talk, I did a TED Talk on how distraction is eroding our capacity. And so many of us are self-proclaimed, amazing multitaskers. And I think a lot of us grew up, especially if you're like Gen Y, Gen X, you grew up having to multitask, and the better you were, the more you can get done, in less time, the more successful you were, or you were deemed successful. And so I definitely, I'm going to even go against my own, what I talk about, but I research it because I actually thrive in a multitasking type of flow. And I know that's an oxymoron. Multitasking, flow, I know they don't belong together, but it's the way my brain is wired. I think it's the way that I taught myself. So unlearning and deprogramming that has been wild, and we can get into that. But let me tell you about the research on multitasking really quickly. It actually decreases our IQ by 15 points. And this is out of the University of California, Irvine, right? It's like trying to drive a vehicle when you're impaired. Like, that's what it feels like. You just can't be efficient in doing multiple things at once. Our brains weren't wired for that. We were wired to do one thing at once or two things at once. And actually maximum, there's a great TED Talk too that I can give you the link to. There was this, showed us this picture on the screen, and he said, I want you to observe what changes in this picture. And only 1% of the people that were there could actually identify what was changing, because we can only focus actually on 3 things in a picture at once. Everything else we don't pick up on. So, that research makes me feel terrible in a sense, because I am programmed to multitask. So it's really the discipline of staying focused. And that's where I've really had to pare down the business and take off some of those hats and really focus on 3, just to really accelerate and pick up momentum.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm curious, and, as someone who's a multi-passionate entrepreneur and creator, and I love doing many things, and something, Melanie, that I really identify with is someone who likes to do many things.
Yeah.
And I actually really fought my inner fire, I guess, to produce and create, because the world, after you're, a toddler or whatnot, tells you to focus on one thing. Oh, you got to specialize in one thing. And then, after I've been an entrepreneur a long time, but once you become an entrepreneur because you could do many things, quote unquote, many things, right? If you don't see the quotes. But then your peers and your colleagues start saying to you, Edwin, you got to do one thing. But I'm programmed, I'm a polymath, I'm a polymath, that if I'm only doing one thing, I'm bored. So I also started understanding and flow and the discipline, because the best I produced in the past, and I'd love to get your insight, is when I was doing computer engineering. I'm learning 6 new difficult subjects every 4 months, and then it switches, another 6, and then switches, and I was crushing it. And then I went to the workforce doing one thing. Guess what happened? I was bored.
It didn't work. You weren't stimulated enough. Yeah,
I wasn't stimulated enough. And I think, like I said, for many years, for my 20s and 30s, I really fought the drive, the inner drive of wanting to do many things, because the science or the world had you say, you know what, you can't do that many stuff, Edwin. That's just not right. You're not going to be good. But maybe that's where my happiness is. And I'm thriving in doing many things, and I just been really committed to it. So I guess when it comes to multitasking, maybe we're specific on terms of what does multitasking really mean? Is it, focusing on 3 things today only, right? Or breaking it down, right? In terms of that. And I don't want to get too crazy on multitasking, but I just want to get your thoughts on that.
There's so many things in what you just said too. I think, again, you're right. We're taught like go and specialize and go and do one thing. And even like that semester, when we go through, whoever has been through, to an academic institution, it's typically semestered, especially in the Western world where 4 months of 5 subjects and, learn as much as you can, memorize as much as you can. And I think, as a business professor, I've really taken that into account and challenged the learning experience and the learning environment and really going towards that experiential and not memorization, especially in entrepreneurship, because that's what I teach in international business, because it's meant to be experienced. The synthesization of data and information, you can't just memorize it and expect to keep it all in here. And then 3 years later, go for an interview and like pull back from your economics class, the thing that you fell asleep, the class you fell asleep in, and, talk about it. I think, a lot of my students will reference the experience that they had in learning the material. And you can, if you're experiencing things, in 5 different classes, that's at a cellular level. I think that's where our memory is stored, and that's where those experiences are stored. So, I don't want to go into any that's not based in science. This is based in my own experience for what I see. I mean, the world does tell us differently. The world does say like, there's so many books written. And again, there's a lot of science and research. The book called One Thing, which I absolutely love.
I have it in the bookshelf right
have it back there?
behind me. Yeah, I have it. I kept that one.
Well, the thing that I retained from that book, because I know it does speak to me, because we have to tame that inner, I want to do everything and be part of everything. So to tame that is, especially when I am feeling stressed or anxiety from that book, the one thing that I just sit back in is a quote from Gary Keller. And he said, what one thing can you do right now that by doing so will make everything else seem easier or attainable, something to that sort. And I love that because, again, when I'm in that frenetic pace and I have 100 things on my list, it's like, no, what one thing can I do? And that's how I tame that.
Yeah. And to that point, right, the thing that will get you closer or to your dreams or your mission is usually not the easiest one sometimes, right? And we are in a world where busy work is easy. Literally, it is easier work, but you get yourself thinking that you're doing the work that will get you closer, like waking up, checking your email, checking your social media, doing this. But really, you should maybe call a customer, create a new deck, or create a new landing page, like something that's not as easy. But if you focused on it, or place the time in it, so you could move closer to that audacious dream or a goal or vision that you have on the board on the wall, right? It's definitely it. One thing I want.
Can I?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to add to that because I'm working with a coach, and creating these new things. All of a sudden, the list becomes there's like 6 new things that I was going to like launch into the world. In the next 6 months, and that's not realistic, right? That's exciting. It'll hit on all the adrenal, the adrenaline, and serotonin and all that stuff, but the thing that I had to find in my deprogramming and respect some of my programming, because I literally do some of my best work under pressure, right? When I'm accountable to people and I say I'm going to do something, I'll get it done. But when I just think about it or write it down, it kind of sits there. So I had to you have to learn how to like understand how your brain works and how your motivation works and how to get stuff done. So I wanted to add that too, because it's just like, what keeps you accountable? And it took me a while to actually get to that. I was like, it's people. If I tell people, if I get a group together, I think it's probably a perfect segue into leadership.
Yeah, no, 100. Well, accountability and sharing, right? It's one thing to pen.
Yeah.
That you're going to write a book. But if you, Melanie, and you've written books, but if you went on social media live and say, hey, I'm writing a book right now and I'm going to launch it, guess what? You didn't need a coach to do that. You just needed the social media. And all of a sudden, you're like, I said it. I put it out to the world.
Yeah.
And as a person, I'm sure similar to myself, who lives in high value with integrity, because you said it outside of your own atmosphere, you're going to get it done. I mean, I challenge anyone listening right now. Is there's something that you're really scared of and you're wondering why it hasn't been done? Share it. I mean, DM us, like, just tell us.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to do it live, because that's kind of scary.
For sure. Share it with one person. Oh yeah. Yep. I'm with you.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah. So I guess when we talk about time and the focus, I'm sure, within your travels, talking about capacity, a lot of people say, oh, I just wish I had more time, or whatever they're talking, because they're not getting to that one thing. Is it just about time, or what is it? What are you finding?
About time? I think it's not necessarily about having more time or wanting more time. I think we're getting confused or misconstruing that with energy as well. And overwhelm and options and opportunities. I mean, never before have we been faced with so many options and opportunities and choices and decision making. And that has a significant downside to it too. I think, there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of fear of missing out now. There's a lot of like, I shoulda, woulda, coulda, language that's happening. If you don't do it now, you're going to miss out. Like, and all of this language that a lot of marketing uses, to motivate people to buy, I think is just created an extra layer of stress on people. So again, this is what's led me to the podcast called Hustle Hypocrisy, because I feel like, we're told to do one thing, yet in the background, it's like, you better hustle your ass off, because you got to get these things done so you can get ahead of the pack. And so I'm like, there's such hypocrisy in that. I'm like, why am I told? So again, there's so much to say about that. And even generationally, how people digest these messages, it varies. But I think it's not necessarily more time. I think it's understanding, what do I want to contribute to this world? Where do my values lie? What makes me happy? What brings me joy? And how do I stick to that without being like pulled and distracted and felt like, well, no one can make you feel anything, but then just kind of like avoiding the feelings of missing out.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I could relate to as well, and it may be a challenge that all of us have, especially in the world of the Instagrams and the very polished life that people are bringing, right? And the hustle comes in as like, if you do this, my framework, you could live like this,
right? But
why can't we find that joy or that happiness, like you say, and start living like this already, so we are happy? Because like what I'm hearing you say is like, we're in this hustle, and I'm sure you talk about this all the time in your podcast, is like, you have to, so you could feel fulfilled, yes. Right? But I think if you're in flow and producing what you want to create to do the impact that you want, I think you're not going to fear anything, because you're inside of it, is right. Yeah. Because I think from what you're talking about and people fearing of missing out, or what do I need to do next, or do I have to do this? Do I have to get on TikTok now? Do I got to do more live? Like, the people start getting burnt out, and people start really impacting their mental health, right? Like, so I wanted to ask, I guess, in terms of your life, in terms of you staying focused, staying in your lane per se. I'm not saying a specialist, but making sure that you're protecting your well-being. Like, what are some of the things that you're doing to ensure that you're always not getting distracted?
Yeah, it is a daily practice. It is like a daily awareness exercise. Because it's not just I'm going to set a goal for the next 12 months, write it down, and my path is set. No, like, you have to be like dedicated to this path and put in place the guardrails to make sure that you stay committed to it, check in to say like, does this feel right? Is it congruent with my values? Is it bringing me joy? I remember working on this project, Edwin, and I delivered it, and it was like a 7-week project. And it was something I had dreamt about doing. It was a project I had dreamt about delivering to a client. And I was like, it's here. It's finally here. I finally get to do it. The 3 weeks leading up was okay. It was intense. But the 7 weeks within it, I didn't realize until after how just unhappy I was, how miserable I was, the strain it put on the family, just the mental strain it put on me. It's like I literally needed some time off after that project. And I was shocked because the thing that we think we want, might not always be the thing that we actually need or is good for us. So I had to really sit back and evaluate, okay, could I have done that differently? Was there any joy in there whatsoever? Kind of like, you're mining for joy. And I'm like, should we be mining for joy or should it just be a little bit easier than that? And so there's a lot of learning in that project and in that flow. But, if I'm focused on the 3 things, so it's writing a book, podcast researching, and the speaking consultation, like the consulting, like that's where it really goes into, everything that I do has to fit in those 3 buckets. So I'll stop there, but everything I do has to fit in those 3 buckets. If they don't, it is a no. That's it.
That's amazing. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is understanding your boundaries, right? But if you didn't have that project but it sounds like it was a consulting project,
yep.
But maybe it wasn't one that fit into, I guess, going through that experience, you realize, oh, maybe it's consulting, but maybe it wasn't in the boundary I wanted it to be. And I guess I'm curious because it was something that you thought you wanted or needed. Where did that vision or idea come from?
It came from looking at where did I want the business to go? How did I want it to grow and scale? And that was one of the ways, right? So it still is. I think what needs, I have to do a postmortem on it. Like dissect the experience. Like what went well, what didn't go well, why didn't that meet expectations? What could I have done differently? Because I think there's still a lot of gold nuggets. You do something really hard, you look back and you're like, okay, what did I learn from that? How can I apply that forward? So I think it's a lot of, did I have the right expectations? When we're looking at expectations, did I have the right outcomes? And is it just that it was just really new? And sometimes new is hard. Will the next time be easier? I think when people run, a marathon or they train for a marathon, there's not one way to do it, right? Everybody trains differently. Yeah, there are guidebooks and kind of, there's yardsticks that, you have to meet. But I think when you run a marathon, I don't know if anybody says like, wow, every moment of that was like exceptional and brought me joy. Like there are parts where you're like, why the F am I doing this? Right. And I think that's what happened too. But at the end, I look and I was like, okay, it was successful. So I gotta find and hang on to the success that meets the joy, that meets the value that I brought.
Yeah. And I think you hit it right there, Melanie, in terms of like being your first time through. Like I am a marathon runner and I still every time I say, what the heck am I doing? The last time I ran was Berlin.
You still do, right?
Well, I don't know if I still do. I have COVID took a hit on
right.
all that in my young family, but I think what you said it correct. If it's something that you believe is part of your journey and will take you somewhere, you got to reiterate.
Yeah.
And I know you as someone who leads a lot of young businesses and their strategy, it's get out there, pivot, get feedback, which you received.
Yes.
And then you get the fun part, Melanie. It's like, okay, what didn't I really enjoy? Is this could I bring someone to do that part or whatnot, or do this and do that? And I always tell people, and I do this with my child, I'm like, hey, if you're going to try anything, make sure you try it 3 times.
Ooh, that's a good rule.
I used to be I used to be a snowboard instructor. It was probably the most joy I job I ever had in my life. I mean, not anymore, but people will always, and anything you try once, the first time could have been terrible.
Sure.
And then the second time they're like, oh, actually, I kind of getting a hang of this.
Yes.
Third time they love it. But you have to try things 3 times.
Yes.
To really give yourself permission to say, you know what? I tried my best. And maybe it's still, I'm not loving this skiing stuff. I'm going to try snowboarding, right? Like whatever it is. But I think you hit it home, right? And the next opportunity like this, and I'm assuming, Melanie, this was a fairly recent project.
Within the last year, yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
So, as we're talking, I'm waiting to hear back from you that you got another one and you crushed it out of the park, right?
It's in the works, actually. It's in the works.
So there it is. I love it.
Yeah, there it is.
We're gonna have to revisit that, right?
Yep. It'll be in the book. No.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love it. I need to. I want to write my book. I'm putting it out here. I'm writing my book, and we'll definitely
Awesome.
get it out there.
Yes.
When it comes to leadership, and you always are in a position where you are helping guide young, seasoned leaders, entrepreneurs. But I'm actually curious, Melanie, what would your peers, colleagues, your teammates say your best leadership quality is?
Oh boy. I think I've heard, the feedback that I get too is the way that I delivered a message, the way that I communicated a concept. It struck them. It hit them in their core. It was just something that they needed to hear that they had never thought of before. And that happens a lot during like speaking, or if I'm sitting one-on-one with somebody. My husband calls me a witch, Edwin, and it's a term. It's a term of endearment because it's just like this gift. And I was just talking to my daughter about it. It's the empath in me too that picks up that energy, and it's a blessing and a curse because in being an empath, or with being an empath, you pick up on everybody's energy, and then you need to learn what to do with that and how to manage that. But the blessing in that is I'm able to, that the emotional intelligence is just so natural for me, and helping manage myself, but helping manage other people as well. And I think in, speaking and consulting, it's a key asset. And I think, a lot of people will recognize that I could pick up on that, manage it, and go with it quite quickly. And so I've learned to hone in on that. I mean, that's I've been doing that, I think, since I can remember. There's a whole origin story.
It's a sixth sense. It's definitely a sixth sense, right? It's something that so do you think that type of intuition, is that something you could learn, or is it just something, is that a gut feeling? Is that people just tuning in to that, and you're just been connected to it ever since?
It's an interesting question, because over the pandemic, that was something that I explored, because I think people are born with intuition. I think every human has that, but it's how we harness it. It's what we do with it. It's, do we shut it down? Do we listen to it? Do we let it take over? I think there's all these different levels. And we make choices. And I think also our upbringing has an impact on how we actually manage that as well. So it's, that's just something that I'm working on. It's a big piece that I'm working on right now. And it's about the origin story. And, what has our origin story done for us? And that's a big piece of the intuition, and really leveraging that to its best possibilities.
Yeah, amazing. I appreciate it. I'm always curious when it comes to, I guess, hacks or things people are doing, or things that they've discovered that they're learning or they're implementing in their daily practice or their personal practice that's allowing them to develop now more as a business leader. Is there something that you're looking at right now?
That I'm looking at as a leader, or that I'm seeing other people do?
That you're implementing on yourself.
Yeah. Again, it's the rule of 3. It really is. And I feel like finally, and I think we beat ourselves up too. I'm 44. And, this has been, so far, if I just look at like entrepreneurship, it's been about a 10-year journey, give or take. And it's just been like figuring out what it is I want to do. What is it that I want to put into the world? What is it that's intentional, that's value driven, that lights me up, that I just want to keep researching, and really staying focused on that. I self-admittedly get very distracted by shiny things, next best things. What can I implement? And I finally figured out what that was driven by. There's a lot of listeners that are probably like, me too, I want to try this. And people will be like, you should try this, and 7 steps here and 10 steps here and 4 steps here. And I'm like, oh my God, like it's so overwhelming. But it's not all about that next step. It's like, what 3 things can I work on that will just come together as one? And that's a really big piece of what it is that I'm working on, is just staying disciplined every single day to say, okay, is it research based? Is this something that's going to contribute to what I can put back in the world? Can I share this in a book? Can I share this on a podcast? And can I share the experience in speaking? So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's definitely.
No, it definitely does. I mean, because you're in line, you're in flow, and you know which way you're going. Yeah. I guess before we end, Melanie, and I know you and I could talk forever. Like I said, 2 podcasters could go on forever. Yes. And people will never know how much we cut out. No. I'd love to get some final thoughts, any observations. Ideally, like what's useful is the actionable recommendations that you could share to the growing business leaders who are listening today.
Yeah, I think and one of the biggest things again is there's not a one size fits all. And people hate hearing that because everybody wants the secret sauce. Everybody wants the recipe. Everybody wants the 7 step, because I think a lot of it too is the fear of doing it wrong. That was one thing that was driving me to I didn't want to make the mistake. And I think as a seasoned podcaster, a professor, an entrepreneur, like all these things that I've been doing for quite some time, I'm like, I don't want to be caught thinking to myself, I should have known better. But in that mindset opens up the doors for so many mistakes, ironically, because then you're avoiding doing the things that you should be doing. So, one of the things is work on that business model. Like, find your value proposition, find the who are you creating value for? What is their problem and how are you solving it? And often as new entrepreneurs or new business owners, they become everything to everyone. I was that. I was creating stuff for everybody's problem. And then I was like, well, what am I doing? So people would be like, well, what's your business? And I'd be like, what's your problem?
You were hustling.
There you go. I'm hustling. I'm trying to solve everything. So I think, again, it's just coming back to really understanding what is it that you love to do. Marie Forleo said this so well, like, again, I think it was like 10 years ago too. It's like, what do people say you're really good at? What do you love doing? And then that nexus is like what you should be doing. Like, that's what you should be doing in business. It's like, people say you're amazing at this. This is what you love doing. Make a business out of that. That's what you want to do. And I think, that's really a starting point.
Yeah. And as easy as that sounds, Melanie, and for those who are listening, this is an evolving process too, right?
It is.
It's not, and I think the younger generations, when I talk to them, they're afraid to make the decision of what makes them happy or what they're good at, and it may change, and your passion and your mission and vision will change, even for someone who's later in their career, right? So I think for those who are listening, it's very, very important is always understand and take a litmus test to make sure that you are in that intersection. You said it better than I can, but Marie Forleo said it, right? That you're in the intersection of that, where people say you're good and what you love to do, right? So,
well, I'm going to be interviewing somebody who has a business called Sustainable Ambition. So she'll be on the season 2 podcast, and that'll be interesting to ask her some questions on. What does that look like? Is that the antithesis to hustle? So we'll see.
Love it. Melanie, just to close, if you could share where we could find more information about you, your business, your podcast, anything else you'd love to share with us today.
Sure thing. You can go to capacitycreator.com. There's a free assessment to find out what state of capacity you are operating in. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Capacity Creator. And you can reach out, Melanie at capacitycreator.com. I would be happy to continue the conversation with anybody who needs a little support right now.
Yeah, and declare it to Melanie. Email her, let her know, and you will definitely make sure you get your dreams and goals, get a step closer to it, right? But yeah, Melanie, it's been an absolute blast. Thank you again for joining me on the Business Leadership Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. Time flew by. Like, I can't believe it. We're already at the end.
That's it, Biz Leaders. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Business Leadership Podcast. This was episode number 172 with my friend Melanie Sodka. One of my key takeaways is when Melanie mentioned that we have never been faced with so many options, so many opportunities, so many choices, that decision making has a significant downside to it. As a multi-passionate person, I could definitely relate to that feeling of guilt and feeling like that I'm missing out because I have so many passions, so many things I want to do, and getting to that shoulda, woulda, coulda feeling. For more information about Melanie, Capacity Creator Framework, or any other resources that we shared, please go to thebusinessleadership.com/172, or definitely just hit the show notes below in any podcast player that you are in. And I would love it if you could share this with 3 like-minded friends who may be feeling a little overwhelmed at capacity, and definitely tag me or hit me up on social media. I'm at Edwin100X. I'd love to say hi to you and your friends. This episode was brought to you by Slingshot Communication, the business leader's preferred cloud phone service. And what I really love about the service is that I'm able to have my personal business SMS phone number. In the past, I would have only my mobile phone that had SMS tied to it. So on off hours, on weekends, depending on the nature of my business or my relationship, I'd be getting text messages when I don't want to. But with Slingshot, I have my own personal business phone number that I could make and take phone calls, but even more importantly, I could do SMS messaging. So during off hours, when I'm recording this podcast, I don't have to reply. You know what? I don't even see the text message. So to learn more, please go to thebusinessleadership.com/SMS. If you haven't done so yet, please give this show a follow, leave a review and a comment on your favorite podcast player. It actually helps us a lot. It helps other business leaders like you discover the show. And I personally love reading the comments that you leave. But until next time, thank you again. Do your best and have a 100x day.
Thank you for listening to the Business Leadership Podcast at thebusinessleadership.com.